everyone. This is Cheryl Walji again from Astral Connections, and here with me I have Alfred Lambremont Webre. We're at his home this time as opposed to Astral Connections, and he's given me the opportunity to interview him here. First off-site interview for us. Alfred is a war crimes judge. He's an author of a book called ExoPolitics and a book in the making, I believe, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And he's the founder of Exo University, and I'm sure he'll tell us about that in a bit. And we're going to get to know Alfred a little bit in this interview. Welcome, Alfred. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thank you very much.
This afternoon, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome. And
Thank you.
Alfred, your presentation you did for us in June was extremely intriguing. The information in there was extremely vast, and there was so much delivered there that I had to interview you and get you to spend a little more time going through what exactly it was you presented, what exactly it is that led you to that study, and the whole idea of exopolitics. I'm sure a lot of people don't even know what exopolitics is, and I'm hoping that in this interview you'll go into that further and tell us a little bit about that. But before we do that, let's just talk about Alfred. Let's talk about Alfred and his life, and let's talk about where was it that you grew up, and where was home, and where did it go from there?
Well, I've been kind of multi-locational myself, and I was born actually on a U.S. Naval Air Base during World War II in Pensacola, Florida.
Okay.
And on my mother's side, I'm, if you trace it back, a Canadian-Cuban family, and on my father's side, French-American family. And so therefore, I, have kind of a typical New World background.
No pun intended.
And I grew up in the Caribbean in Cuba, and went to school both in Cuba and in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And grew up kind of biculturally in an Hispanic environment and in an Anglo environment. So I always carried both of those in me and still do. And I graduated in international law at the height of the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And so, which was a highly illegal under international law operation, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
And practiced law, started out in an international law firm in New York with offices all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
But then my interests kind of instantly exploded into other areas because of all the cognitive dissonance that I was feeling at the time. One of my clients at this law firm was Pan American Airways, and I knew because on the weekends I would go and listen to the Black Panther Minister of Defense speak in parks in Brooklyn, and I knew that Pan American Airways had the contract to fly the body bags back from Vietnam, and that they were loaded with heroin that was being imported by the CIA, and that this was part of what the Vietnam War was about, which was really importing heroin and hard drugs from the Golden Triangle into the black ghettos and to addict the underclass of the U.S. and the American youth, and thereby bring down the U.S. And
define the Golden Triangle?
That's in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, where all these drugs were being produced. And that's what the Vietnam War was really about. The Vietnam War was what was carried on under King George III of England, the Opium War, where the British exported opium from India into China and subjugated China. Well, the Vietnam War was where Dope Inc., which includes the British monarchy, and is led by 13 families, financing families in the city of London, led by the Rothschilds and various other bloodline families. The Vietnam War was about a delayed opium war, which George III wanted to carry out against the American Revolution, which they carried out against the U.S. through the Vietnam War by beginning to bring down the U.S. through addicting the underclass and the youth through drugs, and now drugs, which is carried out by Dope Inc., through the intelligence agencies, which are the arms of the British monarchy, and the City of London banking interests.
Now, you use the words, I know this. So how do you know this? How do you feel you know this? And it's not hearsay or a theory. Like, how would the audience be affirmed of this?
Yeah. Well, it's basic research, and people can go to my website, ExoPolitics.com,
right,
and download for free a 350-page book in PDF called Dope Inc. that documents what I just said,
wow,
going back to the reign of George III.
Wow.
And so, since going back to my bio, since I was a young lawyer at the time and representing Pan American Airways, the cognitive dissonance was just too much. And so, since you asked me questions about who I am, I was trying to address them as to what motivated me to leave Wall Street.
Right.
Okay, and this was in 1970, in the early 70s, late 60s. I then, I was a cooperating attorney for the New York Civil Liberties Union and was a counsel in the Panther 21 trial, where I...
What exactly is the Panther 21 trial?
Oh, that's a very famous trial back in those days, where the FBI set up 21 members of the Black Panther Party with an alleged plot to blow up the Statue of Liberty, which was part of the crackdown on the progressive forces in the U.S. at the time of the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And I represented a member of Students for a Democratic Society that stood up in the courtroom and said, "Power to the people, I don't recognize the jurisdiction of this court," because what the progressive forces were doing at that time, the Chicago 7 trial was also going on, which came out of the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, where all the progressive political forces were being put in these political trials. And so the progressive forces were turning the trials into a trial of the courts by standing up in them and refusing to follow procedures. And so I, took on that kind of case, and then I became an environmental lawyer, the general counsel of the Environmental Protection Administration. Well,
to get away from all that.
Well, it wasn't to get away from all that. It was to chart my own path. It's not that I'm getting away from something. It's that I'm making a positive choice. Right. So, by the end of 1972, I had realized that even in the civil liberties movement and in the environmental movement, it was all positivist thought. Mm-hmm. It was still within the Enlightenment kind of paradigm, not the multidimensional paradigm. And I'd begun reading various books like Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, which showed me that there was an extended reality. And by the end of 1972, my boss, Mayor John Lindsay, had decided to run for president of the United States, and I didn't want to go that way. So I decided to leave my position in the government and to really go full-time in the multidimensional area. I had sought out an expert in parapsychology and extraterrestrial studies.
Will you speak a little bit about the difference between the Enlightenment paradigm and the multidimensional paradigm before we continue?
Yeah, sure. The Enlightenment paradigm, I think, is what has been adopted as the dominant, quote, canon, or the scientific canon, and what dominates the university and scientific curriculums and all secondary curriculums, and sort of is the dominant meme of the mainstream culture, and is used by the culture and by many unseen forces as a regulatory and a controlling mean for the human population. There is no other life, intelligent life, other than this planet. Where in fact, there are billions of universes in this multiverse, and there are trillions of galaxies in this universe.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
And pretty arrogant to think that there wasn't.
Yeah. And so that ties into why I founded ExoPolitics University and ExoPolitics, because ExoPolitics is a scientific study of intelligent civilizations in the multiverse, and Exo University is an online continuing education entity in exosciences, sci-sciences, and exopolitics. And those are the disciplines that the Enlightenment paradigm explicitly excludes, and that the current paradigm explicitly excludes. So that's what I did at the beginning of 1973. And by June of 1973, had published my first book called The Age of Cataclysm, which integrated earth sciences and seismology and geology with parapsychology and psychic prediction in a book about earth changes. And at the beginning of 1973, in February, I had kind of a huge multidimensional experience myself that I can date sort of before that experience my life and after that experience my life. And that sort of cemented in my being the reality of the path that I was choosing.
Would you share that multidimensional experience with us?
Yeah, sure. I was, at that time, I lived in the Soho district of New York, which is used to be factory buildings and lofts, and we lived in a loft. My then wife was an architect. We had a young son, and she had turned it into an architectural, multi-dimensional, futuristic thing that had been featured in New York Magazine. And she had gone up to Vermont to design a ski house, and I was there with my young son. He was in the back asleep in his bedroom, and I was in the front of the loft in my study. It was about midnight, and I was very intense period in my life. I was, decoding biblical prophecy and putting together all these various things. And at that time, suddenly, I felt myself that this huge presence came down upon me. It wasn't that there was a being out there, it's that I was inside that being. Enormous being. And like this, suddenly the being, you started talking telepathically, but it was like you know, we're talking about a being that's like infinite, you know, larger than being inside a Gothic cathedral, you know, just like huge. And talking to it, and it says, and so I say telepathically, who are you? It says, I am the Holy Spirit. But it was like the most deepest, most infinite communication I ever, you know, it's like I go into deep reverence and like, and you know, I was
and
like,
this was at a time period when you were studying biblical prophecy.
Yeah, yeah,
and I guess meditating on those things.
Yeah, yeah, and, you know, and here we were in the Christian paradigm. That's the third person of deity.
That's right.
God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit. Yeah. So it's like, oh God. And so that goes on. I go into missing time, and I'm showed like a whole film or movie of my life, you know, it goes through the whole thing. And I'm given that I'm going to be playing a role where I can provide a lot of solutions for Earth, you know, positive way. So,
would you consider that a near-death experience, or was there no sign of?
It wasn't near death. It was enhanced life. It wasn't near death. It was enhanced life.
Okay, that's a good way to put it.
And
but there was no medical connotation to it before or after. Like, it wasn't something physically that happened to you, or no sign of something physical after.
No,
it was just
like, you know. And then I call it missing time.
Wow.
You know, because it was like really, you know, you just see this movie and these realizations. So that's kind of the experience that before that and after that. And
so that must have opened up some ideas.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's like I had a lot of backing.
Wow.
But so that really gave me a lot of confidence.
Of course.
That the path that I was on, you know, this is fairly real. So I you know, this is 1973, so this is what we're talking 40 years ago. So that has been with me for 40 years.
Have you had experiences such after that?
Not at that
Not
depth.
at that.
Yeah. This is like, you know, 40 years, but my life since has just been an unfoldment of that.
Sounds fascinating.
And I, you know, like right now, I'm just living.
I wish I was a fly on the wall through the last 40 years.
Yeah, it's like right now, I'm just experiencing what I saw that night. So, that, to me, it's just, you know, it's sort of extraordinary. And I don't write about that, or I haven't as yet. And except for an autobiography that I have not released.
Well, I hope you do, because I want to know more about this.
I'm not ready to release that yet. It's a bit wild.
I can imagine. Well,
and so, you know, I mean, I do a lot of things in so many different dimensions, starting with law, politics, you know, which are pretty dense dimensions, and then up to other things that
are more light.
If you release everything at once, people will go, oh my God. See, because all of us are like the tip of the iceberg. You know, we're like the tip of the iceberg to our being.
Right.
And our being is like enormous. You know, I mean, we're like span universes. So, you know, and to like reveal that all at once.
Yeah.
And this world right now is populated by so much negativity, distrust, and fear that
it might be.
You can handle the truth. No, I'm just kidding.
I know.
But you know, it's not time yet.
I've had my share of those experiences too, so I can somewhat relate.
Yeah.
Maybe not to that extent. So what happens the moment after you come out of this experience?
I'm in a state of, you know, utter peace. I mean, you know,
And what drove you to your next step, or were you guided, or do you feel you've been guided along the way as to what to do
Well,
next?
I'm just sort of, acting. I'm just doing what I perceive needs to be done in terms of creating a positive future on Earth. And, acting for social justice. And that's where the social justice movements come about in terms of the Tribunal of Conscience movement that I'm involved in now. I mean, all of this has a background.
Of course.
Over the years I was involved with Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez, and we helped set up the congressional investigation of the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X. And now
We have a presentation on Friday on John F. Kennedy and his assassination. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, there you go. But now we have a worldwide Tribunal of Conscience movement, which is where the court systems, which are now so compromised that they aren't dispensing justice against the what I call International War Crimes Racketeering organization that has hijacked the planet, citizens' tribunals of conscience actually, under natural law and universal jurisdiction, can acquire jurisdiction as tribunals and under principles of justice, the same principle as a citizen's arrest in the case of a murder in progress. And i.e. that in the very design of nature of the universe are the principles of justice, and that they will out if the institutions and the laws aren't dispensing justice. Well, then they devolve down to the citizens.
Naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, I'm now a judge on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, which is a duly constituted Citizens Tribunal of Justice, and we found George W. Bush, Tony Blair, UK Prime Minister, Richard B. Cheney, Donald H. Rumsfeld, Vice President and Secretary of Defense, and their lawyers guilty of war crimes for the war in Iraq and for torture there. And I'm also a judge in the 9/11 Tribunal, which was itself a false flag operation, which was 30 years in the planning by a corrupt elite to attempt to bring this entire planet into a lower state and into World War III and a domestic police state and a devolvement of consciousness. And so we're moving in that area because all of the authorities have covered that up, all of the parliaments, all of the courts, all of the media. They've just caved. And now also I'm a judge on the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State.
Caved willingly or caved through suppression of some kind?
Well, that's an interesting question, because we know that going back to the 1950s, through Operation Mockingbird, the key mainstream media, in many of the editors, there are double agents.
You'll have to define Operation Mockingbird, I'm sure, for the client.
Operation Mockingbird is a project of the intelligence agencies of the U.S., whereby key editors in news agencies and media are actually undercover agents, intelligence agents. So they look like journalists or editors, but they're actually double agents.
Hmm.
And so that anybody who attempts to report about 9/11 or tell the truth, that news is suppressed or they lose their job.
Hmm. That's quite in depth of a conspiracy, for lack of a better word. I have no choice but to say then.
And so it's fast. So that's the sort of documentation now that the 9/11 Tribunal is assembling.
Now, how many judges or how many are on the tribunals?
Well, right now there are over 20 sworn witnesses. This is the 9/11 Vancouver Tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
There are over 20 sworn witnesses, all of whom are experts in the 9/11 area. And there are 2 judges on the panel currently, myself and Connie Fogel, who was leader of the Canadian Action Party. She's a very distinguished Canadian attorney. And the witnesses will be making evidentiary submissions under affidavit. And then there'll be an indictment issued naming principal accused, who are individuals who participated in a common plan to create the events of September 11th and the aftermath.
So you mentioned for the Kuala Lumpur hearing, you named those who were found guilty, for lack of a better word. So what happens now?
Well,
we held them responsible, but now what?
That's a very key question. There are at least 5 or 6 different avenues, and the same will be with the 9/11 Tribunal, and the same will be with the 3rd tribunal that I'm a judge on, which is the International Tribunal for Crimes into Crimes of Church and State. And that is that there are a number of arenas that the indictments or judgments of these citizens' tribunals of conscience can be taken for enforcement. And those include at the international level and at the national level. At the international level, they can be taken to any of the national courts that are signatories of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, because they have been granted universal jurisdiction to prosecute war crimes. And so they can be taken to the courts of Spain, the courts of Germany, which do prosecute war criminals as a complaint. Say, look, we have this court record. Please arrest and prosecute these people.
I guess then there'll be another trial.
Yeah. And they can be taken to international organizations like the ICC, which has compromised itself, because in 2007 there were over 400 complaints of war crimes by the UK and the US at the prosecutor's office of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and that person had refused to take action on them, which is why the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal was formed in the first place. So they're dominated by the Western powers and by this Illuminati matrix, power matrix. And so they kind of go after African leaders because they're trying to get hold of Africa now. So they'll prosecute all of the Africans rather than prosecute Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, who in fact have started wars that have resulted in 1.5 million innocent civilian women and children killed and millions of people displaced and left homeless. So that's kind of a picture of
It's right here.
yeah, that's a picture of the terrain out there.
Yeah.
But the pen is mightier than the sword, and justice prevails in the end.
Justice will definitely prevail. So, you've written many books now, and your latest book is ExoPolitics.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this book, what brought it into being, and what when people get your book, what they're going to see in here, what they're going to read. Is it going to be more about the
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's kind of go into the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole.
Okay.
When you pick up that book, it's not an ordinary book.
No, I tried reading it.
Yeah. It's a what we call a quantum artifact.
Right.
And that is that we have eyewitnesses who this book was written here in Vancouver, BC, in 1999.
Okay.
It founded the field of exopolitics, which is the science of relations among intelligent civilizations in the multiverse.
Is Vancouver the only place that exopolitics as a field exists right now? Or
No. Now, as a result of this book, there are exopolitics organizations in over 50 countries.
Excellent.
And over 30 to 40 countries have released their UFO files. As of starting in the year 2000 was the real acceleration, which is when my book, the first version of my book, was published online. So now, this is the hardback book was published in 2005. The reason I say the rabbit hole is that we have eyewitnesses that this book was taken by the CIA or some entity and taken by time travel sometime after 2005 or after, and traveled by time travel back to 1971 or earlier. And our eyewitness, Washington attorney Andrew D. Bishago, himself involved in DARPA's Project Pegasus as a time traveler, saw it in the company of two other witnesses in 1971.
Pegasus was a time traveling project, if
Yeah.
I understand properly, right?
Yeah. And so he was sitting there, and there was a satchel brought out of the sort that you carry, that they carried secret, classified documents in. They opened the thing, and out popped ExoPolitics by Alfred Lambremont Webre back in 1971. And in 1971...
And how did you find out about this? Through?
Andrew Bishago, through the witness.
Wow.
In 2005. And it took me a long time to get over the fact that I had been spied on. I call it time travel surveillance. So let me share with you what time travel surveillance is like.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you.
Since you asked, what is my life like? Well, I should tell you. It's called whistleblowing. So, you might as well share it. In 1971, while they had my book, I was...
But wait, I want to go back to 2005. Like, how do you find out about this happening in 1971 from Andrew
Bishago?
Yeah, but how did you meet him? How did he bring this to you? Or
I met him in the year 2000.
Okay.
And we're both attorneys. And so, fellow attorneys have a strange way of talking to each other. It's like you talk to each other in numbered paragraphs.
Paragraphs.
Yeah, it's really strange, And so he revealed this to me, and then I'm now going to tell you a bunch of stuff as to why it's congruent.
Okay.
It's not too much out of left field.
Okay.
Okay, so back in 1971, which is when Andrew Bishago and two other witnesses saw this, okay.
It wasn't existing yet, supposedly, though, right?
It existed in the time-space continuum.
Okay.
And time travel technology is a technology that allows one to go from point A, B, C, D to point E, F, Y, G in the time-space hologram.
Right. Parallel universe or...
Yeah, yeah. You know, we are stuck in point A, B, C, D in the time-space hologram, but if you hop into a time travel capsule or, you know, using a time travel technology, and there are 8 different types of technologies, and you can go to ExoPolitics.com or ProjectPegasus.net, and it's all laid out there.
Okay.
It'll take you over to point EFYG, and you can pick up a copy of this in 1971. Okay?
Okay.
Now, in 1971, I was General Counsel of the Environmental Protection Administration of New York City. Okay? And part of my job was to go out and speak to the community on environmental protection. And, you know, air pollution, noise pollution, water pollution, you know, and environmental laws and all that kind of stuff. And I had a staff and gung-ho environmental lawyers, and we were out to like really do it. And I got this invitation from a group calling themselves the Delaware Valley Industrial Engineering Association. I said, okay, I'll go. And they came and picked me up. There was this guy in a suit. Now, we got in his car and we drove for a couple of 2.5 hours or 3 hours. And it was kind of strange because they were very different from he was very different from the community groups, environmental groups that I spoke to. Mm-hmm. That were generally students and, you know, housewives, mm-hmm. and that were like, you know, they just want to change the environment. And we got to this...
Very motivated and
very
passionate about what they were doing.
We got to this nondescript office building. I went in there and there were 50 men in suits. And I knew this was not an environmental audience. I knew there was cognitive dissonance, right? And I've got a good antenna for cognitive dissonance, let me tell you. But I said, you know, something is just not right here, but I'm just going to play it straight. So to me, I said, these guys are spooks.
Right.
They're spooks. And so
You treated them as environmental.
Yeah, I just played it straight and gave my straight stump speech. Right. And throughout it, they were, I remember it really straight. They were sitting in the audience and they were smirking at me going, you know, trying to like run numbers on me, you know. But I just went, you know, and went through my thing and analyzing this in hindsight, and I've written an article about this whole incident, which is at ExoPolitics.com. It appears that these were DARPA, Department of Defense, and CIA personnel who were in possession of my book ExoPolitics at the time, 1971, were engaged in time travel surveillance of me and of the extraterrestrial issue and of ExoPolitics 30 years in advance. And they had 40 years in advance, and they knew that I was going to be doing 40 years later what you and I are doing right now. I'm sort of talking about this, right? They wanted to see what I was like back then. Right. It's kind of gauge it. And that's how the national security state, using quantum access, time travel, and teleportation technology, performs political surveillance. And people can go to exopolitics.com and click on the right hand, there's a link called Time Travel. Mm-hmm. Click on that and you'll see an article of mine, or Google it, that's called Time Travel and Political Control. And the article sets out how time travel technology was published in Veritas magazine in Australia, how time travel technology is used one of the principal mechanisms of political control of the hidden matrix,
right,
the secret government. And so I've experienced it directly, and I'm sharing that now, and I've written about it, and it's all documented there with sources and multiple sources.
Wow. And so now, where does Andrew fit into this picture? Like, he happened to have this book at some point prior to you publishing it, obviously.
He saw that book for the first time in his life when he was 6 years old, or they're about 6 or 7 years old, in 1971, in the early 70s, when he was an experimental subject in Project Pegasus as a child participant.
Wow.
And then approached me.
I guess he's the next person we got to interview.
Yeah. Now, thus far, and people can go to ExoPolitics.com, and also we'll talk in a moment about Exo University.
Exo University, yeah. I want
is
you to
we
go into
have
that as well.
5 independent whistleblowers.
Yeah, you wrote an article about another one recently, did
Yeah.
you not? Yeah.
Yeah, 5 independent whistleblowers from the secret quantum access projects of the U.S. government involving time travel and teleportation. They all give congruent stories. We all have them. These are 5 separate. And so these are 5 different sources.
What motivates them to come forth now?
Truth.
That's awesome. That's so good to hear. And in order to learn more about what these 5 whistleblowers have brought to light, I guess Exo University would be the place.
Yeah. A good place to start is go to www.exouniversity.org, and there are various classes and seminars there.
Okay.
And you can go to exopolitics.com, and there's a menu that makes it very easy. Go to topics like time travel, topics like life on Mars.
Right.
And that will bring you right into all of the revelations of multiple whistleblowers in these subject areas.
Well, I'm quite overwhelmed with all this information that you've just shared with us, your book, ExoPolitics, your Exo University website, and I just see a world of information opening up to the public that didn't exist before as a result of this. It's a great service you're doing, actually, Alfred, and I commend you for it.
I'm just really happy that it's 2012 and that things seem to be converging, you know?
Yeah.
And that the new is like
You're
really
not one of those
coming
ones
out.
who believes that the world's going to come to an end in December, are you?
No, there's, in fact, one of the articles that you'll see by going there, one of the links says 2012 to 2025, a positive future, and click on that. And that'll go to articles like, are you on a 2012 to 13 catastrophic timeline or positive timeline? And that shows that there's all sorts of evidence that there's almost 2 different timelines. One a parallel catastrophic timeline and one a positive timeline. And
And we're on the positive timeline.
yeah, and the time-space hologram is composed of timelines, and they're almost like parallel lanes in a multi-lane highway.
Are they spiral too?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and that's actually a better analogy, but we don't have spiral fingers, so.
Fair enough.
And so you can shift spirals or you can shift lanes. And that's what is occurring, is that we're shifting lanes.
Well, in Islamic philosophy, time is cyclical, so that's why I brought that up.
Yeah.
I was curious it was consistent with the scientific discovery that you've embarked on.
Yeah.
Well, I could sit here and ask you questions forever in all different areas, but let me just ask you, is there anything you want to share with the audience that maybe we haven't discussed and maybe I wouldn't think of bringing up?
Just that, just this is that to really push the positive button rather than the negative button in every opportunity, and that the positive timeline is a choice.
Right. And we make that choice as
and
individuals.
We make that choice. And that's a fundamental
So staying in
revelation.
love rather than fear, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And you can go out there and you can find all of the reasons why, not. And you can find all the reasons why it's wonderful. And you just make that choice.
Thank you, Alfred. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Sure.
I look forward to having you back at Astral.
Thank you so much.